on the dating app after we both liked each other. She was warned, though. My profile said, "You want a bad boy? I'm bad at everything." And after 2 months, I rejected one offer to meet up. We did actually meet. Never been happier before. That is the best pickup line I've heard in a long time. Probably ever. Was this on Tinder? Because that sounds like the kind of pickup line that only works on Tinder, where standards are a thing of the distant past. I'm not saying it isn't funny, but if you try it almost anywhere but Tinder, don't expect too many results. Then again, Tinder doesn't sound like an app where it takes you 2 months to meet a person. I'm pretty sure it's exclusively for one and done meetups, but maybe I have that wrong. Story 25. My girlfriend approached me at a barbecue where I knew basically no one and talked to me for about 2 hours. The next day, she found me on Facebook and asked me out on a date. 2 dates later, she kissed me and invited me back to her place. I suspect she'll propose to me at some point. As a guy, this is the preferable way to start a relationship. Story 26. I am the awkward/introverted boyfriend. Since I considered her 100% to be out of my league, I also had no hopes/illusions about ever dating her. Consequence, I wasn't as awkward with her as I usually am with women, and she ended up asking me out. Going strong for nearly 3 years now. 10 out of 10, would date again. Story 27. Boyfriend here. Tried to act casual over Facebook with a message suggesting getting some coffee someday. When I realized that didn't work at all, I built up some courage and asked directly in person with a shaky voice for getting some lunch together someday soon. Result, 5 happy years and counting. That's a long lunch. Story 28. He didn't really have to. We were friends at the start. He brought me gummy worms because his then-girlfriend hated them. It was love at first bite. Love our gummies. Reminds me of that long man ad that was on the front page just a few days ago. Story 29. Some mutual friends of ours came up with some plan for all of us to hang out, and then they would all conveniently have to dip at the same time, leaving just us two. Was a little nerve-wracking at first, but we had a good time. Then he asked me out at the end of the night. Story 30. I'm the introverted boyfriend. I bribed her with cold Jack-in-the-Box tacos via text. She came over, somehow talked until morning, feet for me, and now it's been 3 years and I'm about to wife the frick out of her. Wife the frick out of her? That's cute as crap. To be fair, even cold Jack-in-the-Box is worth it at pretty much any time of night. It usually gets harder to make commentary once the stories get shorter, but this story deserves a shout out because this is honestly the type of story that needs to get told more often. It doesn't always have to be a big gesture, like cleaning all the bees out of her car. It doesn't have to be a message from God, just as many marriages started with a simple fast food date, and we need to hear more about those. They aren't the type of stories that get romanticized, but if you're the one living them, they mean just as much as any other story. It's worth remembering that. Never assume you don't have a chance because you can't think of anything huge or impressive to do for your first date. If the relationship has any legs at all, tacos should be enough. Story 31. He didn't. I approached him. But I asked him out twice, and he didn't get the hint. It took a year later, and we hung out extensively for 8 months for him to ask me out. Except he asked me out by texting me, "Wait, are we dating or something?" Story 32. He asked me, would there ever be a chance we could be more than friends? I told him I had to think about it, but 10 years later, we're still together and married. Do you still tell him that you are still thinking about it? Story 33. I asked him out. On the first date, I walked into his room naked after going to the restroom. He took the hint, and we're currently engaged. The naked man works about a third of the time, but the naked woman always works. Story 34. We met on Tinder, and he asked me about breakfast foods. I was suspicious because I thought it was going to be some gross pickup line, but no, he's just really into breakfast food. 3 years together this summer, living together for 2. Story 35. While we were leaving a class, I complimented her on a dress she had worn the previous day. I still cringe. We aspire to be as elite as you are. Story 36. I asked him out, then I paid for the first date. I don't have time for traditional gender roles. Who does? Again, there's really no should when it comes to these things. Don't get caught up on how to drop hints or how many days to wait before texting someone after getting their number. That's all just noise. It's great for a sitcom episode or an American Pie movie, but it has no bearing on real life. If you like someone, ask them out. If they make you feel like it's supposed to be more complicated than that, they probably aren't worth your time.
Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Reddit. What's the loneliest thing you've done? Story 1. I was home alone on New Year's Eve. I was playing The Sims in complete darkness. I had a small get-together with some other Sims. As the ball fell, I whispered, "Happy New Year," to myself. It really isn't as bad as many think. I'm more of a homebody who likes to be by myself and play video games anyway. Story 2. 2 weeks ago, I went to an 11:15 p.m. showing of the final Hobbit movie. I was the only person in the theater. I spent 20 minutes finding the perfect seat and seriously contemplating asking them to pause the movie when I went to take a piss. Holy shit, the movie's long. As I walked out of the theater at almost 2 in the morning, there were no employees in sight. My car was the only one in the lot, and light snow had recently fallen and was completely untouched. As I was about halfway to my car, I turned around to look at the theater, and all the frontage and interior lights were off. It looked almost like it had been closed all along. Story 3. I used to have a dog named Douglas. He was the child dog of an old relationship. No one was around. I liked to sing random songs to him, replacing certain words with his name. Turn down for dog, stairway to Douglas, sweet child of dog, etc. Anyhow, after my ex and I broke up and parted ways, he got all depressed. Between work and graduate school and not really having a yard he could play in, I realized this wasn't the best environment for him. Though despite loving that dog more than most of the people in my life, I called my ex and decided to let her keep him. A little while after he was gone, I caught myself singing "Sweet Child of Doug" alone in my house, and I got really sad. This was months ago, and I'm still sad about it. For the record, while I'm still sad about having to give Douglas up, it helps knowing it was best for him. My ex and I aren't really on good terms, so it's not a good idea for me to sing him. I've been in a different, much more healthy relationship for a while now, and it's better for everyone if I just move on. That said, I still miss him all the time. He's very small and anxious, and I'm a pretty big guy, but we were a pretty cool duo. Story 4. I once walked into Dairy Queen wanting a sundae. Not knowing if I wanted a strawberry or chocolate, I compromised and was a little fat and got both. When the girl handed the sundaes to me, she asked if I wanted 1 spoon or 2. I told her, 2 please. It's not like they're both for me. She laughed. I went home and ate both sundaes. Story 5. When I moved, I had a lonely period where I hadn't had anyone to have a conversation with for around a year. I ate food I knew I couldn't, so I'd have to go to the emergency room and the staff there would see my details and somehow would wish me a happy birthday. Story 6. I inadvertently sent a friend request on Facebook to the wrong person who happened to have the same name as the intended recipient. For whatever reason, that person accepted the request. This person and I have never interacted and don't live anywhere near each other. I now read all of her updates and follow her life story. I've cheered during both of her pregnancies, felt scared when she had to deliver one child 2 months early, cried when her husband was hurt in Afghanistan, and felt proud when she was accepted to medical school. I realized one day that I had invented a completely one-sided friendship with an online stranger all while sitting at home alone in my pajamas. Story 7. During a long stretch of being single, I went to a club on Valentine's Day. All my friends had something going on and I didn't want to be alone. One of the gave me a kiss on the cheek. It left a big red lipstick mark on my face and she whispered in my ear, "Hope that doesn't get you in trouble." Yeah, you're right. If I had someone at home who cared about random lipstick on my face, do you think I would be at a club by myself on Valentine's Day? Ended up going home, getting blackout drunk by myself, and trash talk young kids in Call of Duty. Story 8. As a kid, I used to sit quietly in my room with my temple to the door handle and felt so alone. I sat hoping my parents would open the door and just knock me out. They didn't open the door. My parents weren't bad. I kept everything to myself, so I don't think they had any idea. Mental health wasn't something people in my rural town had to deal with before, so I don't think I knew what was even going on with me. Story 9. My loneliest moment occurred about 2 years ago. It was during the summer and had gotten 2 free tickets to go to the local Renaissance fair. I did the only thoughtful thing I could think of. I asked my girlfriend of several years if she wanted to go. She was a teacher and claimed that she was too busy preparing for the school year, so she kept stalling and gave me non-committal responses. I asked her if she wanted to go on Friday night. Saturday came and went. I asked again if she would be game to go for an hour or two on Sunday for something to do. They were free, so I didn't really care if we stayed for a short amount of time. She claimed again that she was too busy, even after I offered to come help her, and still didn't give me a firm answer. Sunday rolled around and I asked again. She gave me the same routine. It was too short notice to invite anyone else, so I ended up going to the fair by myself. While I was walking up to the admission gate to get in, I saw a younger couple getting ready to pay for their tickets. I still had an extra ticket, so I gave it to the couple. They seemed genuinely happy. This situation ignited an intense feeling of sadness. I spent an hour or two wandering around the fair alone. I wasn't happy, and I knew it. Less than a week later, I was single by my own choosing. Story 10. I planned my birthday a week before, and I invited all my best friends to the mall to go eat and go bowling. I got there an hour early on the day and sat at our meeting spot. That's when I got the first text. "Sorry, dude, can't come. Happy birthday." Then slowly, one by one, they all messaged me about the same thing. I was so mad and almost cried. When I calmed down, I got Starbucks and went to watch The Fault in Our Stars. I came home hoping for a surprise party or something, or maybe a dropped-off gift. Nope, nothing. Damn, that is rough, dude. Story 11. I would get upset and vent at Cleverbot because I didn't want to bother my friends with my troubles. Also, the only Christmas card I ever get in the mail is from State Farm. Whenever I get it, it makes me feel pathetic, since the holidays already bring me down. They usually make me cry because my insurance company is the only entity that bothered to spend $0.35 to say Merry Christmas. That's usually the lowest point of the year because I'm usually drunk from Halloween to Valentine's Day. Story 12. When I was in elementary school and high school, I was bullied horribly. When I was about 13, the kids in my class invited me over to go for milkshakes and fries to celebrate the first day of Christmas break. I excitedly told my parents. They were so happy for me. It seemed like I was finally making friends. Needless to say, they all stood me up. I was too scared to go home and tell my parents that, once again, I had fallen for their lies. So I stayed out by myself for a couple of hours, ate fries and drank a milkshake, and felt so alone. Obviously a horrible way to start Christmas break. Story 13. The 30th will be my birthday. A year ago, I was stuck in Atlanta for Snowmageddon. I sat in traffic for 27 straight hours until they closed the exit I was taking when I was only half a mile from it. I slept, woke up the next morning, started my semi-truck, and the engine died. Sat in that truck for 4 days waiting for a tow. No food, no water, no cigarettes. Melted snow to drink. On my birthday, some National Guard guys came and brought me some MREs. I had a scented candle, so I lit it. Heated a kind of pasta, and had a brownie while I sang myself happy birthday. It was a job I did for a year, and if you knew me, I'm not at all what you would expect a trucker to be like. A few months earlier, I'd been at the top of my game as a Peace Corps volunteer with friends and a great life. That year was the lowest I've ever been. That moment was the furthest I'd ever felt from myself. This year I'm in Korea with a really good job and I'm wanting to make up for how bad things were then. Here's hoping. Story 14. Rented out a restaurant that housed over 70 people after coming back from deployment so I could spend time with all of my friends and family in one place. After having announced the event for over 3 weeks, nobody showed up. Having sat there for over 2 hours waiting, I got up and left. Nobody called or texted to cancel. I still think about that day. Just an update on what happened since then. A year and some months, I've moved to a new location and made new friends. I've also met the love of my life, now my fiancé, and we're scheduled to get married on August 22nd. It was a very unfortunate day that I still think about to this day, but I regret none of it, because had anything been different, I probably would not be the woman I am to marry. I also have a best man, whom I happened to meet after my move. Story 15. Basically, my past 5 years have been pretty much alone. I go out and meet people, but we never end up hanging out. I can chat people up and be funny and get phone numbers at bars. I call these people the weekend or the next weekend to hang out, and it never reciprocates into anything. I guess when people sober up, they realize it might be awkward going out to get drinks with a complete stranger. Story 16. I went for a run to clear my head after a rough week at work and a fight with my ex. It started to rain. I ran too hard and had to lean on a fence to catch my breath or stop myself from vomiting. A person walked by with their dog. The dog stopped and looked at me and gave a half wag with its tail and tilted its head quizzically as if to say, "You okay, bud?" I know I probably romanticized that moment, and actually, the dog was just like, "Blah, hi, play, game." But in that brief moment, it felt like the dog was the only living thing around me that week that bothered to actually look at me and actually gave a shit. That was a very lonely moment, especially as the dog bounced away and I slowly walked back to my empty flat. Story 17. With my birthday last year, I was mostly on my own. My parents were on a month-long trip to see family in Australia, and they'd asked me if I minded them missing my birthday as it was the best time to go. My girlfriend was also away at the time. It ended up being me on my own for my birthday, so I put a party hat on for my Christmas cracker and got drunk whilst playing games all night. If I'm honest, I wasn't actually that lonely. I kind of want to do it again this year. Story 18. I bought a Liverpool FC scarf because it has the team's motto, "You'll never walk alone." I'm not even a Liverpool fan. I just like to take it with me when I go on long midnight walks. I may be alone, but I've got a goddamn scarf with a dragon, bat, liver, bird on it. So who gives it? Story 19. The saddest moment that has resulted from me living by myself these past 5 years was when I was at my parents' house playing Legos with my 4-year-old nephew. When it was time for me to leave, I told him goodbye, and he was all, "You're leaving?" "Yeah, Oliver, I have to go home." "Bye. Who's missing you?" "Nobody, Oliver." Story 20. When I started high school, I wasn't really friends with anybody. I knew a few guys from middle school, but that was about it. My sister and her friends who knew me were in grade 12 and went to the same school. So for the first month of school, I didn't have anyone to eat lunch with and didn't want to sit alone in the cafeteria. I didn't have my sister see I had no friends. She would no doubt worryingly tell my parents, and I didn't want them to be concerned about my inability to make friends. So I started eating my lunch in the washroom stall and then moved to secretly eating my lunch in the library. After about a month, I decided to go to lunchroom because my teacher let us off early, like 10 minutes before lunch bell. I figured I could go sit and eat my lunch quickly before people got there. As I was eating, these black guys who were in my gym class came and sat next to me. It was their usual table. They lived in what you would call a hood in my city, although we don't really have a hood, just a place where a lot of low-income families lived. And then soon, the entire row filled up with guys from that hood, and they basically went on usual making jokes. They knew I was there, and even though I wasn't talking ally, they involved me. I ate lunch with them every day for the next 2 years after that. Story 21. 3 years ago, my wife of 8 years suddenly left me. After a few months of voluntary seclusion, I decided on one final hurrah to my loneliness. I took my wedding ring, cost 900 euros, gold was worth about 200 euros, and took it to a gold buyer. Sold the ring for exactly 29.95 euros, leaving the gold buyer flabbergasted, of course. Then I went to the liquor store across the road and bought a bottle of Johnny Walker, 29.95. Went back home, closed all the curtains, locked my doors, played my depressing music playlist on repeat, and turned off my telephone. With all that done, I opened up the bottle and downed it in, about an hour or so. The rest of the night was spent crying drunkenly, freaking out, bashing my head into the wall, and other such pleasantries. I've never felt as lonely as that night. The following day, I woke up with a huge hangover, which passed in due time. I got on my motorcycle and drove to my parents for dinner. A period of seclusion now ended. Story 22. In my commute home one day around 15 years ago, I came across a Lhasa Apso mix that had been hit by a car and left for dead. No collar, no one looking for it. It was cute and kind, licking my hand when I came close, but its neck was broken, and its back was broken in at least 2 places. No one was around, so I gently picked it up and brought it to the sidewalk. I was a paramedic at the time and had some tools on my belt, but I knew little of canine anatomy. As such, I was about to cross into virgin territory. I knew that I had to put the dog down, but I didn't know as what would be the best way to do that. I tried gently smothering it, but did not cover all of its mouth and nose with my hands. It was awkward, with weird angles everywhere. Next, tried to use my Leatherman's pliers to close off its windpipe, and the poor little guy was even licking my hand while I did that. Unfortunately, that didn't work either. So I took off my uniform shirt to get at my undershirt, which I then used for the smothering. It was heartbreaking, especially when I felt that little guy twitching, and then it was done. Shirtless, I looked all around me again, not a soul in sight, not even a child on a bicycle. The pain and anguish of what I had just done were mine alone to bear. Even though I had done the right thing, it did not feel good. I wrapped it in my undershirt and took it home to bury it in the backyard. I left a note in the fence near where I found it, along with my phone number, but no one ever called. I don't even know what that sweet thing's name was. Story 23. After I finished school, I worked for my parents, helping run their business, but we argued all the time. One day, after an especially intense argument that ended in me being told to go to hell, I packed a small backpack and hitchhiked about 100 miles to a nearby city where I rented a room. I come from a large family, and had never lived on my own before, but was so mad that I decided to not let anyone know where I was. I was so busy working with one very miserable old guy for the first 6 months in construction that I didn't even take time to make any friends. I remember when Christmas Day came when I would usually be celebrating with family and lots of relatives. Now I was all alone. I went for a walk, everything was silent, no traffic on the road, and no stores were open. I walked down the road peering in people's windows trying to see families being together. I finally made up with my parents, then got married, had 9 children, and now look forward to being alone. Things change. Story 24. Sometimes our mall has this table during the Christmas season where, for a small donation, these volunteers will wrap your gifts for you so you don't need to worry about wrapping your own. I just gone to a store and purchased Fallout 3 for PS3. I headed over to these people and had them wrap the gift for me. Then I went home and feverishly ripped open the wrapping paper because I wanted to feel like someone had given me a Christmas gift. Story 25. I kept a drawer full of stuff I associated with my unrequited crush. The Michael Jordan jersey he gave me on my 23rd birthday, a bunch of rubber bands we used to shoot at each other, this paper towel roll we had a big drunken tug of war over in the streets, chopsticks from a restaurant we went to, cheesy letters I wrote to him and never sent. I kept this stuff even after I told him how I felt and he didn't feel the same way, which is the sad, lonely part. Story 26. I used to spend my break times and lunch times at school sitting in a toilet cubicle playing games on my old Nokia and eating my lunch. I never had any friends during school and I was bullied by what felt like 3/4 of the school, so I never enjoyed free time at all. Some days I would mix it up and walk laps around the school until my next lesson, but that ended when someone decided to pour a 1-liter bottle of Red Bull over my head. Bringing back some shit memories, man. You make 1-liter bottles of Red Bull? Story 27. I picked my college at the last minute in July of 2010 and wasn't able to find anyone I knew that needed a roommate for the freshman year. I was able to opt out of living in expensive dorms because I had college credit. So I moved into a place on the edge of town with 2 guys I didn't know. One was a recluse that I probably saw less than 20 times for the whole year I lived with him, and the other was kind of a snobby rich boy. We didn't hang out. The living room was a dead zone and everybody spent their time in their bedrooms. I also didn't have a car and had to take a bus to make it to campus. The people I knew from high school weren't really my friends, and weren't going to drive me to their parties when they were just going to get drunk, so I had nothing to do each weekend. One Friday night around 9 p.m., I was watching Magnum Force, Dirty Harry 2 on my laptop in my dark bedroom. I heard some noise from a party next door and I remember just looking out my window through the shutters for 30 minutes, wondering what it was like to be them. This happened every weekend. It's just that night that sticks with me the most. Story 28. I used to work with my friend Marvin. After a while, Marvin took a job farther away, but every Tuesday night we'd get together for dinner. Thing was, Marvin and I lived in Maryland and his new position was in Virginia. He had to come around the DC Beltway to get to wherever we were supposed to meet. And Beltway traffic can be horrible. I've occasionally had 25-minute drives take 3 hours. Anyway, this one Tuesday evening, I get to the restaurant on time, get a table for 2, ask for a Coke, and sit down to wait. I brought a book with me, so I'm just sitting there waiting for Marvin, drinking my Coke, and reading my book. When the door would open, I'd look up, but it wasn't Marvin. After half an hour, the staff came over and asked if I'd like to order. I said no, I was waiting for my friend. They nod and head off. Go back to my book. Repeat again in 45 minutes. Then another half hour. The staff were just totally pitying this person sitting there. Waiting so desperately long for this person, still believing they're going to show up, when it's clear to the staff that they've been stood up. Close to 3 hours late, Marvin came in with profuse apologies and we had a lovely dinner together. We went back to the same restaurant periodically. They had an insanely good crispy eggplant. And I'd usually end up waiting for Marvin, but after that first night, the staff just came by to offer refills until Marvin showed up. But man, you honestly could feel the pity oozing from the waitstaff.
What is your most NSFW story about walking in on someone doing the dirty or being walked in on? Story 1. I was getting my dick serviced and it was about over when I heard a knock on my door. My girlfriend did not hear it, but I yelled out, "What?" knowing if I did not answer, my dad would come into my room to grab something. Unfortunately, he's lost a fair chunk of hearing and came in anyway. I pushed my girlfriend back down, trying to hide her in my dick. She thought I was trying to force her head down, so she got stiff and didn't move, then the door opened. Dad took a second to realize what was going on, and he then said, "Sorry, pull your pants up," and left. During the time, my girlfriend realized I was trying to hide both our bodies, completely relaxed. Was the first time I was fully deep-throated and I did not know what to do. Pull out and come on me in front of my dad, or leave it in and come inside an area I know I shouldn't. Dad was in the room for about 10 seconds, and by the time he left, it was too late. I tried to pull her off. She wasn't in a hurry, not knowing Dad had left yet, but somehow or another, I came in her mouth and it came out of her nose. Yes, the old angry dragon move. Story 2. I was about 18 or so, and I was hooking up with my stepsister's friend when my dad knocks on my door. I and the friend stop, and my dad pops his head in and asks if I'm going anywhere tomorrow. I reply no, and then he leaves. The next day, I asked him what that was all about, and he replies, "Well, I heard what was going on, and I just wanted to make sure it wasn't your stepsister. Thanks, Dad." Story 3. So one fine summer afternoon, my husband and I were sitting in the backyard having some drinks, and as one does, I was getting a little bit frisky. I went into the house to make another pitcher of drinks and came out in my birthday suit. My husband took the hint, and we proceeded to get it on a lawn chair. I was on top of him, facing the house, when all of a sudden, the patio door slides open, and there stands my mother-in-law. Now, a normal person would be embarrassed about barging into someone's house and seeing them having sex. Not my mother-in-law. She just stands there laughing her ass off. So I jumped up and grabbed the closest thing to cover up, with which happened to be this disgusting kiddie pool we have for the dog. My husband still didn't know what was going on, so he was standing there at full mass, shorts around his ankles, wondering why I'm flopping around trying to roll myself up in the dog pool. Finally, he sees his mother, puts back on his shorts at light speed, and starts laughing at me. I ended up walking through my house, wrapped in the dog pool, to collect my clothes and get dressed. Well, at least you can see where he gets his humor from. Story 4. I was on top of my girlfriend at the time, doing the deed. Her mom props the door open. Not knowing what to do, I just froze. Her mother decided to calmly walk over to me and rest her hand on my bare shoulder. I stayed frozen as if she was a f***ing T-Rex. All she said was, "You better be wearing a condom." Walked out and shut the door. I died that day. Were you, in fact, wearing a condom? Story 5. When I was a freshman in high school, I had my first serious girlfriend, and we were both new to sex. Our parents weren't the type of parents to let us just do whatever we wanted, and this included doing the deed. So we had to improvise and find a place that we could get down at when our parents were home that wasn't either of our houses. So we resort to public. We would do it almost any time we found a quiet and secluded spot. I know that's not a good idea, and you can get charged with some pretty bad crimes if caught by someone who actually cares. But we weren't bothered by this fact because we were fueled by our hormones. We went about a whole year of using the public method and never got caught. Well, one chilly Saturday afternoon, our usual spot at our local university center is closed for Christmas break, so we had to find somewhere else to get down. We wander around the downtown of our city until we finally find this old tunnel that looks like it was intended to be like an overflow tunnel that empties into a small creek for when it rains. Our city has some flooding problems. So we walk into this tunnel and lay our jackets out into a makeshift bed and get down to it. Everything's going great for about 6 minutes, and then I catch a glance past my girlfriend and notice a man squatted down at the entrance of the tunnel recording us with his cell phone. I instantly froze and went soft and whispered that someone was watching us. My girlfriend quickly pulls her pants back up, and we snatched up our jackets and took off into the darkness of the tunnel. We were way too mortified to just walk back out the way we came with that dude standing there. So we walked through these wet and dark tunnels for about 15 minutes until we came out on the other side 3/4 of a mile across downtown. After that, we both agreed we were not having sex in tunnels anymore. Story 6. My wife and I forgot to lock the doors, and our, at the time, 4-year-old daughter walked in on us. We hid as quickly as we could, and we were successful at hiding what was going on. The next morning at breakfast, my daughter asks me if we thought she was a ghost, and that's why we were hiding under the blankets. I told her we thought she was a ghost, and we didn't know it was her until she said, "Mommy, Daddy." She laughed at that and thought it was silly we thought she was a ghost because, well, Daddy always says ghosts aren't real. Story 7. When I was a teen, my girlfriend at the time's mom walked in while I was under the covers going down on her. Not knowing what to do or say, I just stayed there hiding until she finished her conversation with her daughter, hoping I wouldn't be noticed. However, in the panic, I failed to realize my feet had been sticking out the end of the bed the whole time. Needless to say, I was mortified and could hardly face my girlfriend's parents afterward. Although in the end, she was pretty alright about it and let me off pretty easy, only making a few jokes before conveniently forgetting what had even happened. I would have said, "Oh hey, your feet are on backwards," before closing the door. Story 8. The only time I've walked in on anything, but it's a doozy. I went to tell my brother that a classmate of ours had passed away. I knocked on his door and received no answer. Not unusual, since he's a heavy sleeper, but I decided I ought to go ahead and wake him up to tell him. And he wasn't sleeping. He was jacking off to hentai with his headphones on. I managed to leave without him noticing since his back was to me, but I still saw more than I ever needed to. Story 9. Back when I was a senior in high school, around 1996-97, I went to homecoming with my best friend's stepsister. His dad was married to her mom, and she had just moved in with them less than a year prior. My friend and I double dated his stepsister and her best friend. Nothing ever happened between us two, just a date. So fast forward to New Year's Eve. I'm at my friend's house, shooting pool, playing darts, etc. His stepsister was there with a few of her friends as well. The night winds down and I end up in the living room watching TV. I decided it was time for bed and I would usually sleep in my friend's bed while he took the couch. I waltz into his room, it's dark and I hear the sounds of then it stops. He says, "Duck Munch, is that you?" Me, yeah. Him, oh, okay. He continues and I just go to the living room. I get up after a few minutes to get some water and his door opens. His stepsister walks out, half dressed, and I was like, oh. And she ran to her room. So he was banging his stepsister. He came clean to me and said he was sleeping with her. He ended up proposing to this girl and she said yes. During prom, they ended up going and I had my own date. Later in the evening, my friend's first cousin asks my friend's stepsister/fiance if she wants to dance. So my friend is okay with it, obviously, because it's his cousin. They go dancing kind of far away from my friend and me who were talking. So we look over and catch his first cousin and his stepsister/fiance making out on the dance floor. It was at that point I was done. Story 10. I was with my high school girlfriend in my room around dinner time, and she had said she wanted to try tying my hands behind my back while she, slobs on the knob. I agreed for two reasons. One, if this was an attempt at rendering me defenseless to murder me, I was pretty sure I could still take her with my legs. And two, this was a free pass to have to not do any work, so win-win. That is until she starts going at it and my dad walks in, presumably to ask us what we wanted for dinner, takes one look at her, and I immediately close the door and have not said a word about it since. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago, and still nothing. He's a fun guy who likes to poke fun, so I'm just waiting for the day he finally gets to make his joke about it. Story 11. I was doing the dirty with my high school girlfriend at the time. Her parents were strict, so we took my car behind a golf course near her house. She was facing back and I was facing forward. She stops and was like, "The police are here." I turned around and sure enough, a cop's lights are flashing. I hopped into the driver's seat and pulled up my pants while my girlfriend was trying to get her pants on in the back. The cop taps on the window and says, "What are you doing?" My immediate response was, just having some fun. He took my ID and asked my story to make sure nothing sketchy was going on. Ultimately, he handed back my ID and said, "You guys have to find a better place. It's the middle of the day." And that's how I lost my virginity. Sounds like a McLovin old enough to party response. Well played. Story 12. Not exactly during. I was 16 and my girlfriend was 15. On my way to her house to lose my virginity while her parents were gone. She sneaks me into the garage and tells me to wait a minute, then sneak into her room. So I count to 60, step into her house, and run directly into her 13-year-old snitch of a brother. She plays it off as I came to borrow something, shoves a CD in my hand, and I quote-unquote leave. 5 minutes later, she brings me from the garage to the bedroom. I get her shirt and her bra off for the first time, and her mom calls and says she'll be home early in 5 minutes. I have never booked it so fast or been blue-balled so badly. I ended up having to wait about 2 more weeks. Story 13. This story takes place about 10 years ago. I was having a house party at my mother's place, as you do. This one girl was there. We'd been circling each other for a while, and at some point, we went upstairs to my room to Sometime later, some of our friends figure we're missing and decide to go looking for us upstairs to mess with us. They open the door to my room, turn on the light, and here we are, her on top of me, and the covers somewhat covering us, thankfully. I quickly go over my options. Figure I can't physically remove them from my room because I'm a man, and I figure my only defense is making it too awkward for them to stay in the room. So I don't stop pumping. The leader of that clique of friends is also talking to me, so I figure again, the best bet is to just talk to him like normal and make it too awkward for him to go on. Yeah, I wasn't exactly sober. After a couple of seconds of it and a couple of sentences exchanged, I realize I'm making full-on eye contact with my buddy while talking to him and still pumping. So I stopped. They left rapidly after that, and I guess the awkwardness of the situation caught up to them right after it caught up to me. We didn't resume. after that, asserting dominance just like you're supposed to. Great job. Story 14. Back in college, when I was visiting my then boyfriend, now husband, at his fraternity house, we were getting down with a get down when we were suddenly showered with drywall/insulation and greeted by two chubby legs protruding from the ceiling. Turns out some of the brothers got drunk and thought it would be a good idea to explore the attic. The rest of the brothers stormed into the room to see if their fallen comrade was okay. Though there I was, covered in fiberglass insulation, putting on an unintended show for some of the guys who would later be at my wedding party. Story 15. My ex-girlfriend, when I was young, had a clever little trick for stealth Nikki. She had a pair of tights with a crotch ripped out. She wore them under a skirt when I came for a visit. She brought a blanket down to the basement den, put a movie on, and covered us up. Then she reached back, fished my erection out of my pants, and guided it home while we were supposedly innocently snuggling on the couch and watching Willow. She even pre-stashed a cleanup towel under the couch cushions before I arrived. Her mom came down the stairs many times to check on us. "You kids okay? Need anything?" And there I was, balls deep in sweet, slippery, tingling ecstasy, my heart pounding as I tried to look calm and cool. My girlfriend, who'd been softly moaning and grinding herself on me a few minutes before, was cool as a cucumber. "No thanks, Mom. We're good." Actually squeezed on me a few times while talking to her. Pretty sure she got off on the danger somehow. If her mom ever told us to get up right now and come with her, we'd be so busted. But it never happened. Do you guys need anything? Snacks? A condom? Let me know. Story 16. We were getting our walls painted back when I was around 14 years old. 2 rooms closed out. There were 3 painters, 2 men, and a woman. Mom asked me to give the painters some coffee and some snacks. I entered the room to see one of the guys going hard on the lady, like Chewbacca style. The other guy was painting as if his life depended on it. I've never been the same since. The youngster in me obviously knew what was going on, but too embarrassed to tell Mom. I just went to my room and dashed my brains out. The thought of the third guy rolling the roller furiously up and down while the other 2 were rutting was absolutely hilarious. Story 17. I was young and stoned with my then girlfriend. My mom walks into the room whilst I'm riding my girlfriend like a Scottish jockey. I was super embarrassed, and then she said, "Don't worry, it's natural. Where do you think you came from?" Then proceeded to try and hug me. 1 out of 10 would not recommend it. Story 18. My girlfriend and I went parking next to a lake in the middle of nowhere in the family car. We'd been there a lot, and there was seldom ever anyone around. Anyway, the back seat doing what teenagers on a Saturday afternoon do when there's a knock on the window. There are 2 police officers standing right outside the window. My girlfriend starts bawling and we scramble to get our clothes back on. Thankfully, the police waited patiently. They asked for our ID and where we lived. Apparently, they were looking for a runaway, which is what brought them out there. Cop sees my ID and says, "Are you Mr. Nathan's son by any chance?" Oh God. My dad was an EMT and a firefighter, so he knew a lot of the area police officers. My dad never brought it up though. Found out later that he knew about it, but just thought it was funny. Wasn't our first or last time we got caught, but it certainly was the scariest. Story 19. When I lost my virginity to my high school sweetheart, I could hear my parents laughing in the room next door to whatever TV show they were watching. It was so ironic we both started cracking up laughing during mid-sex, and my parents yelled, "Are you laughing at us?" I wanted to ask the same thing. Another thing happened while I was having sex with my girlfriend at the time after a night of heavy drinking. We both fell asleep on top of her bed. I woke up to her mom putting my boxers on me and saying, "Quiet, your father's gonna get up in about 5 minutes. Go to the couch before he sees you." He literally came out as I closed my eyes on the couch. Story 20. I was f***ing this chick in her apartment when the landlord opened her apartment door without knocking first. And as soon as he opened the door slightly, she screamed, "I'm busy," while riding on top. I never once stopped doing my thing at all. The landlord never saw me at all, since the kitchen counter would have obstructed his view of me while we were f***ing on the living room floor. All he could have seen was her bouncing on my dick and my feet at the most. When the landlord opened her apartment door, bro, that's illegal as Story 21. I lived with my girlfriend and her grandmother for a time. We lived in the furnished basement with our own area. One morning, we're going at it, like really going at it. Propped up on pillows, grabbing shit for leverage, Well, her grandma walks into our room with no warning whatsoever. We're all so in shock. I freeze like a deer while balls deep. Her grandma sheepishly asks if either of us will need a ride to work later. We said, "No thank you." We did, but not anymore. Later on, her grandma pulled me aside to tell me that she wasn't comfortable with us having sex under her roof. I politely reminded her that we were like 20 years old and were in a 3-year relationship, and I was sorry that it made her uncomfortable, but she had no right to insist on something like that. We paid our rent and had a whole private living space, and we expect her to treat our privacy with a little bit more respect. She actually took that very well, and that was the end of it. Story 22. Not during the act, but after having sex while still we were in my room with the door shut. She was in the bed, and I was on my chair in front of my keyboard and computer. I started playing Build Me Up Buttercup and singing it to her. Well, my roommate heard this, and being that it's the best sing-along song ever, came up to my door singing and knocked to see if he could come in and sing with me. I said, "Do not come in," but he only heard, "Come in." So my roommate walked in on me, get on my chair playing piano, and my girlfriend get on my bed. The worst part about it was that he didn't recognize the situation and stayed in there for a solid minute, confused as to why we told him to come in when we were. Your roommate doesn't know how to read the room. Story 23. I was spending the week with my girlfriend's family at their beach house. I had my own room downstairs, away from everyone else. It was right off the kitchen and had its own door to the common first floor bathroom. At one point, the rest of her family went out to the beach, so we started f***ing like animals because the beach had been making us extra horny and we could hardly get any alone time. Well, the next thing we knew, her mom had decided to come inside to get another beer, and now she was pounding on my door. Obviously not happy. I told my girlfriend to run into the bathroom and come out on the hallway side. You know, like she had just been using that bathroom. Mom didn't buy it. She was pissed and said we were lucky Dad didn't catch us. The best part was, about 30 minutes later, I had to go to lunch at the restaurant next door and sit between my girlfriend and her mother. Story 24. First time getting head, the first time for her to give it. I hear a creak and look up and notice the door has opened a little. Then, in a very thick accent, I hear her mom say, "No more." My girlfriend seems incredibly casual about it and just says, "Oh, my mom's home." I was freaking out. We go outside because I'm gonna walk home. She says, "Oh no, my mom's gonna give you a ride." I had never met her mother and didn't know if she was a crazy psycho. I said, "Hell no, I'm walking." We dated for 5 years. Her mom and me and her entire family got along great. Oh, and we weren't allowed to see each other for a while. Her mom took the mail, took her to work with her, and unplugged the phone, and she was furious. Eventually, she realized with us at the same school, sneaking out to see each other, it would be better for her to let me come over where she could watch us. That got really kinky there at the end. Story 25. There was one time I went on a night out with my mates. I was the designated driver, so I didn't have any drinks. My friends were busy getting drunk and I was bored. So I start hitting up a group of girls by the bar. I was joined by my friends and one thing leads to another. I took one of the girls outside and we start making out. I brought her to my car and we start having sex in the back seat. Since my phone was turned on silent, I didn't notice my friends were trying to contact me. Apparently, the group of girls was looking for the girl that I was banging, and my drunk friends in their obliviousness brought them over to my car. I remember I heard the knock on the window and a flash of light. I thought it was the security guard, but was in fact my friends and the girls looking at me, but through my tinted window with a phone flashlight. They swear they weren't recording. I end up awkwardly agreeing to drive the girls to their hotel, and that was the longest 7-kilometer drive of my life. My friends were all asleep at this point.
Redditors who went out for cigarettes and never came back. Why did you leave? Where did you go? What is life like for you now? Serious. Story 1. Throwaway for good reason. I've always lived in an abusive house, both mentally and physically, and never saw a proper way out. I started working at 14 years old in a convenience store at $8 an hour and hid all my money I made in a locked container in a nearby wooded park area. I did this because my parents would have taken all the money if they knew that I was working at all. By the time I was 18, I had close to $10,000 saved up and had finished high school. I was supposed to start university that year, but early on in the summer, I waited until my parents were out of work and found and took all of my documents, enrolled out of the university program I was supposed to be in, and left. I took a bus to Alberta, and I've been living here since doing labor. It's been almost a year and a half, and they haven't searched for me yet. Not that I'm aware of, at least. How is my life now? I'm poor, barely getting by, but at least I'm living alone and happier than I was before. Story 2. Sort of. My cousin went out for a walk once. He was dating this woman who was just an awful human being. She got pregnant and swore it was his, and once the kid was born, the state went after him for child support, and he wasn't even on the birth certificate, even though they were living together. Anyway, the paternity test came back showing it wasn't his, and she flipped her lid. Just lost it. He asked her to calm down and said he wanted to take a walk to cool off. He left everything he owned, minus the clothes on his back, and his wallet. He went for a walk that he never came back from. A few years back, the kid found him. He was 16 or 17 and went on some giant rant about him being a bum and a punk ass or whatever other nonsense. My cousin told him he wasn't the father and abandoned him. The kid left a whole hell of a lot more confused than he showed up, I think. Story 3. I was living with a very mean and controlling girlfriend. If it wasn't her way or all about her, she just threw a fit. One day, I had enough and said that I was going to the store and just kept driving. I literally drove for 12 hours and showed up at a friend's house 5 states away and asked if I could crash on his couch. I called my boss and said I wanted to quit work. He was pretty cool about it. He knew my girlfriend and actually set me up with a job in my new city. I had never spoken to my ex since. Soon after my relocation, I met my now wife, and I could not be in a better relationship. Best thing I ever did. Story 4. Just failed out of college, moved back in with my dad, and things weren't really going well between us. I was depressed and not really going anywhere. I was angry at my dad because he came down on me so hard, but I was mostly angry at myself. And his attitude toward me just kind of compounded it all. Anyway, one day after being at a friend's house and hanging out all over the city for a couple of days, I finally came home. Things around the house were just tense, and I felt like nothing. And like I would never get out from under his weight. So I just started packing some stuff. As I was leaving, I remember coming out of my room with a bag. This wasn't unusual, because I would often take a bag with me when I'd be going to a friend's house, but today my dad was standing at the top of the steps and just looked down at me. I remember very vividly him just standing there with his hands in his pockets, just looking at me, and then me looking away, and he quietly just asked, "Where are you going, son?" I just looked up like everything was normal and just said, "I'm going to some friends and acquaintances' house." He nodded slowly. "When are you coming back?" I shrugged slowly. "I don't know, Dad." Somehow, he knew. I could feel it. I never came back home. Days turned into weeks and months and then years. I could tell he knew. It makes me so sad now when I think of it, like I tore his heart in two. He had never been a very expressive man, but I could tell just how sad he was. I needed this, though. I needed to go off on my own and suffer the real world and grow up some. It still hurts my heart to think about him slowly nodding after I told him, "I don't know, Dad." I've been in contact with my dad since I left, and things are pretty good. I left during a time when cell phones were not popular, and I spent a lot of the time on the streets at first, with the only thing I owned being a car that I kind of, lived out of. Eventually, a good friend of mine had his family take me in, and I spent years helping their family while searching for what to do. During this time, I would periodically just speak to my dad and stepmom and mom and stepdad on the phone every few months. They knew I was alive and well. My dad really never brought up the fact that I'd left and would just make sure I was doing alright. We just don't have a relationship where we express much. I think he understood as time went on. See, he has this idea of how I should have progressed through life. I wasn't good at his plan. I was too immature. I did not leave because I was unhappy with him and what he provided me, but more so that I couldn't stand shoulder to shoulder with him and make my own success. I just wasn't who he expected me to be, and it took a lot of growing away from him just for us both to understand that. After a few years, I went to visit him in his office, and it turns out that he had bought me a cell phone. It was my first. It was enough of a sentiment for me to understand that he really understood what I needed. He just wanted to talk to me occasionally. I tell my dad I love him every time we talk. We live in the same town, so I often visit him and my stepmom with my girlfriend when I can. They love her more than me. Story 5. One night I just packed the essentials into my backpack, walked into a train station, and got on a train to Newport News, Virginia from Pasco, Washington. No one knew I was gone until 3 a.m. the next morning. It was to be with a girl my family was totally 100% against. That was a year ago, and it's all working out perfectly. I'm happier now than I ever have been before. Story 6, kinda late, but I'll share my story. I grew up in a foster care, and all the homes that I lived in were either abusive or running a business collecting cash to house kids for me. My actual mom was a very heavy drinker and was abusive, hence me being in foster care. As an adult, we had a very good relationship. She was proud of me, impressed with my work ethic, and amazed that I had gotten a fully paid education via scholarships at the state university. Everything was going swimmingly until I started to do better than my immediate family. They started to think I had abandoned them and that I was too good for them once I started pursuing my education. The last conversation I had with my mother and sisters occurs on Thanksgiving 2011, when I drove 3 hours to sit down and have our first legitimate family dinner in several years. I showed up, my mom was drunk, and my sisters were incoherently intoxicated on narcotics. My sister yelled at me for abandoning my family and called me unforgivable things. My mom said to me, "I hope you achieved all your dreams. Lord knows you had to abandon ours." I got up from dinner and left. I spent the entire drive back home for 3 hours hysterically sobbing. I haven't talked with them since. I know it was bitterness and the drugs talking, but it really did shatter me to the core. My mother passed away this year, and that dinner was the last time I ever saw her or spoke to her. Both of my sisters were incarcerated at the time, so I flew home to clear out her estate. She didn't have anything but a mountain of bills and a house full of items to sort through. I donated almost all of it to Goodwill. While sifting through her belongings, I did find a lockbox, though. The lockbox contained her wedding ring from my late father and some photos of my sisters and me as kids, perfectly preserved. It also had a single note inside, which was addressed to all three of us, with corresponding paragraphs dedicated to us. My paragraph said, "Daniel, words cannot describe how sorry I am and how much I have hurt you. It's eaten at me every day for the last 10 years. I drink because I wish I could have been the mother you deserved. You were the strongest man I have ever met. I'm sorry. You deserve so much more than I gave you. I love you with all my heart. I hope someday you can forgive me. Mom." It destroys me inside to know that my mom died thinking that she didn't mean the world to me. If I'm being honest, I started drinking very heavily after she passed. She died thinking I didn't love her with all of my heart. I carry her driver's license in my wallet, above mine, so that every time I take it out, I get to see her. But more importantly, she can see me and know that I'm always right here. I just went on a bender when she died, but I do have my life put back together almost a year later. Unfortunately, my sisters and I aren't on speaking terms. As cliche as it sounds, they still resent me. Although I still reach out to them and let them know that the door is always open. Hopefully when they get older, we'll be able to have a relationship. I understand where they're coming from, and although I disagree, I'm not bitter or angry at them. Story 7. I did this basically. Told my parents that I was going for a hike in the woods for a few days, but instead took a flight to Europe and joined the French Foreign Legion. They figured I was dead for a few weeks, but eventually they figured out what I had actually done. It's been almost 2 years and I'd still rather not see them ever again. But one of these days I'm gonna have to go back and see all my younger brothers who still live there. As for why, it's a long story. I didn't have the greatest childhood. Basically, I just decided that I had nothing better to do and life was boring as hell, so I might as well do something stupid or crazy. So I just left and never looked back. Whether or not I'm better off now than I was before is debatable, but at least I can say I've done something with my short little life. My parents were/are religious fanatics and complete narcissists with their own special brand of Christianity. They homeschooled me my entire life until I was 17, at which point they kicked me out due to religious disagreements. I managed to survive for around half a year myself. Unfortunately, I was kinda lacking in the life skills department. Basically, until I left at 17, I never had any friends, never left the house without my parents, and had no diploma or any other record of me doing school. I also found myself lost, without someone yelling at me all the time and telling me what to do. So I figured I would just join the military. Just do as I'm told, not have to worry about bills or food or anything. Perfect. Unfortunately, my national army just told me to wait 2 years and I have no patience at all, so my next logical step was to join the FFL. So I didn't last long by myself and I ended up coming crawling back to them and staying with them until I turned 18. But I wasn't idle. I saved up money, stole all my documents from the lockbox where they kept them, and bought a plane ticket. And here I am now, halfway across the world, speaking a different language and protecting different people. Story 8. I left my abusive husband 7 years ago. I just walked out the door and I never spoke to him again. I had squirreled away money for years because he controlled my income. He had this idea that I was miserable because we didn't have any children, so he tried to change that by me so I could get pregnant. He didn't know I was using birth control. I had resigned from my job, so I just left. I couldn't bring children into that life. I went to live with my parents in a different part of the country. Now I live in a different country. I have a kind and loving partner, and we have a daughter. I'm happy most of the time. My family doesn't tell people where I live in case he should find out. I don't know what happened to him. I hope he's dead. Story 9. American that moved to Australia for 2 years, got a girl pregnant, fell in love, and saw her for the horrible person that she really was, but stuck it out. After the baby was born, I had to be sure he was mine. The test came back showing no parental match. I confronted her. We fought and she swore up and down that it was a bad test. Wanting to believe it, I scheduled another test for the three of us to go to. $800 later, 2 days before the test, she played dumb and said she never agreed to that. Told me to get out of their life and that her child was not a science experiment. I stayed with a friend for a couple of days and then came back. She acted like nothing happened and just wanted to move on. Another test was no longer an option in her book. It was the hardest decision of my entire life, and it still makes me sick to think about. A week later, I scheduled a flight back to California. I've been back for 4 years now. We talked a bit over the years after I left, but it just went back to her wanting to fight. After some antidepressants and heavy drinking, I'm finally starting to feel whole again. I look at the world very differently now. Story 10. My parents were split and hated each other and would always put me in the middle. The drugs and alcohol they were both doing didn't help. Got kicked out of each of their places and went back and forth over some shitty circumstances involving them wanting all of my money to live with them. Then playing the guilt card on each other that they took me in when the other kicked me out. I got a steady retail job that I had to work 6 to 7 days a week at odd hours to get full time. 2 weeks before Christmas, Mom said her place wasn't a truck stop and I couldn't come and go at all hours of the night and said I had to leave. Heard similar from her before and didn't want to go to Dad's again, so I called some family and they all refused to take me because my mom had called and told them I hit her. Since I was still in the same house, I told her she was a horrible person and an even worse mother, and left. Grandma knew my parents were crazy, so she helped me as much as she could. Still getting phone calls /emails /Facebook messages asking me when I'm going to stop being such a so we can be a family again. I have seen both since. Invited my friends through Facebook to things they would have invited my parents to. Finally netted up and told them both to get the out of my life. Mom still leaves me drunk /high /crying voicemails in the middle of night, either telling me that she loves me or that I'm all that's wrong with her life. Dad sends me emails telling me to get the stick out of my because I'm still his son. Still spend time with Grandma. Friends' parents mean more to me than my own ever did. Now I've got a full-time job and an awesome dog, working on doing better in my life in general and trying to move into a place solo. Blood is not thicker than water. Will never speak to either of them again if I can help it. No regrets. Story 11. Left my family close to 5 years ago to move to California to start a new life. I was 400 pounds, living a lifestyle of prescription drugs and drinking at 17 with my family. I was good in high school and even went to college early, but wasn't able to secure a loan there to continue past the first year. Dropped my shit life there and came here. It was a very tough time, but I'm a lot better now, and I had some help from my adopted father, but paid my way aside from the ticket here. I live on my own now and manage an office selling printer parts and various other money makers online. I started my own business last year and have been paying out of my pocket to continue school here because the college I went to wouldn't release my transcript. I've lost a great deal of weight and I am away from any unhealthy addictions. My family is for the most part very close to me. My mother died 2 years ago. I'd planned to go to her birthday in 2013, but she died 2 weeks before it. The only regret I have is leaving that door open. I'd like to think she'd be proud of where I went. Story 12. Mom cornered me in the bathroom after chasing me around in the house and told me to punch her when I tried to leave, and punched me instead. I said I'd call the cops, and she said she would do the same as she's done with my ex-stepdad. Tell him I punched her, and it'd be her word versus mine. The next morning, I got into a broken Ford that was still in her name, even though it was mine. Went to get the oil changed and told the guy how long he thinks the car could make it. He said I'd be lucky to make it around a block and that I wouldn't even go in reverse, among other things. At the same time, I thought, I'm only going forward. 3 days later, I drove from California to Maryland and spent about 5 years without contact. Reconnected, foolishly thinking people change. People don't change. The last I heard from her, she wanted me to sign over my apartment in Russia so she could sell it and give me the money. I told her I'd happily sign it over, but she didn't need to pretend that she'd give me a dime. I've also been working since the age of 12, albeit for less than $8 an hour when I started. Only reconnected because I have sisters, but the brainwashing she's done against me is done. Both my sisters are one is pregnant at the age of 18, failing grades, and neither will take me up on my offers to help. I'm the pariah who left and traveled the world, but I'm a loser because, well, f this thread. F you, Mom. Story 13. Not the same thing, and there's another drama involved, but I want to keep it short. We went through a bad breakup. To get away from it, I went to Sri Lanka in 2004 during Christmas. The tsunami happened. Came back and told my family and about 2 friends I was leaving LA. Boarded a plane a few days later for New York with 2 bags, no apartment, and no job. Found a job in a flat within the first few weeks. I've been here 10 years now and have no regrets. Story 14. I was left. My dad and my mom fought, my dad left, and then he killed himself. On one hand, I have no memories of him because I was too young, and I was very sympathetic to mental illness and ideation. I have had bouts of serious depression in my life. On the other hand, his absence and the lack of dad made a huge gaping hole in my life. The strangest part is when I turned the age he was when he killed himself. I'm 36 and I'm older than my dad ever was, and I still feel young, like I have many years ahead of me. I wish I had the opportunity to know him. Everything I know about him is someone else's memory. Story 15. My father just walked out on us when I was 9 and walked out on everything. Racked up a load of debt before he went without my mother knowing, through a gambling habit that he had which we didn't know about until immediately after, and the hounding from people/companies that he'd borrowed money from. Some of them were the kind of people that he didn't want to owe money to, and the next few years were kind of rough. Add to that, my mother got sick around the same time and ended up unable to leave her bed for a few years. I think the illness was caused or at least exacerbated by the shock of his leaving. Not gonna lie, it was rough, and I ended up getting homeschooled as they were afraid that he'd show up and pick me up from school one day. And after a little while of that, my confidence was so drained that I avoided school as much as possible. Police were looking for him and eventually found him after a year or two in a town 200 miles away. He didn't want to get in contact with anyone and nothing came of it. He was an ex-policeman, so I guess he knew what to say or something. Then a few years later, we got a phone call from a lady who had found his address book, informing us that he had died and she was looking for his next of kin. It was ended with us traveling to where he had been staying, only to find the elderly lady who was basically bleeding dry financially. Some of the stories he'd been spinning to manipulate people were incredible. People there thought of him as a hero. He told them about how he'd started a new life after nursing his sick wife with cancer until she passed away, how my brother had been inspired by his story and he was working as a doctor abroad, and in his fantasy, I had never actually existed. I can't really say I'm angry about it. I grew up afraid that I'd end up like him, but I think when you're exposed to something like that as a child, you can either see it as an example of how to live, or you can look at it and do everything in your power to avoid becoming it. Story 16. My mother left me at her door. I would visit every Saturday for a few hours and then she wasn't there. After 10 plus years of extreme hate towards her, my uncle enlightened me. He said, maybe she left you for the better. Turns out she had some extreme mental issues. Drug abuse. It's amazing how a few words can change your life. People who have dialed the numbers written on bathroom stalls. What's your story? Story 1. I was at a restaurant and they had the give $1 to charity and put your name on this piece of paper that we post on the wall. While waiting in the lobby for my friend, we saw one that had a name and a phone number with "Call Me" under it. I figured, what the hell, why not? Girl answered and I asked if it was Mary. She said yes and I explained that I'm in the lobby of the restaurant and her name is on the wall with her phone number. She doesn't believe me despite my best effort to convince her that I don't know who she is. Eventually, she asks me to walk out of the front door in the restaurant, which I obliged. And she says, holy shit. Meanwhile, I'm standing in a parking lot looking around trying to figure out who the hell is looking at me. She asked me to take the paper down and thanked me. Apparently, one of her coworkers told her that he did it and she didn't believe him. They worked in the area and frequented the restaurant. Story 2. About 10 years ago, someone wrote this, "Call this number for a good time," on the sidewalk. So I saved the number for shits, thinking I would call the number and at least let them know how I got it, but I never did. Just kept the number saved as question mark, question mark, question mark? 3 question marks, you know. Well, the other day, I was on Snapchat and I saw those 3 question marks pop up and suggested friends or whatever, so I added her. And she added me back. She's a babe, and I had no idea what to say to her, but I want to tell her how I got her number and not seem weird. Story 3. I knew a guy that called a number written on a $5 bill. He figured she must be a quality girl because it was a 5 and not a single. She had a great voice on the phone, so they made a date. He played guitar in a popular local band, and there was a hip restaurant next to the club that they were playing, so they arranged to meet there before the gig. He figured they'd have dinner, and then he'd impress the shit out of her with his playing. He was truly a fine guitarist. So he walked into the restaurant and looked for a girl in a pink dress. There was one, and she was enormous, so he slipped out before she saw him. So during the show, he sees the crowd part as a huge girl in a pink dress makes her way to the front, where she glares at him during the entire set. Afterwards, she screamed at him for standing her up. He felt a little guilty, but he said he'd feel worse if he had dinner with her and then dropped her. After all this, his warning was to not call numbers you see on bills. Story 4. When my friend and I were 11, there was a public bathroom in the park where we had soccer practice, and outside that public bathroom there was a payphone, and on that payphone was scrawled a number, and above it the word sex. I don't recall ever paying for a call, so maybe it was a 1-800 number. I don't remember it. It was a recording of a woman's voice. I remember only the beginning, but I can hear it crystal clear. "You wanna have fun? Yeah?" And then a bunch of feminine giggling. We would hang up when the recording asked for a credit card number to continue the call. I think we were terrified our parents' credit cards would somehow get charged and we would both get caught. Kid logic. We were/are both straight females, but we still called that thing all the time. It was seriously the most risque thing I had ever done up until that point, and also probably for a long time after, sadly. Story 5. I did the modern-day equivalent, which was responding to a Craigslist ad in the casual encounter section. If anyone wants tips or pointers, I shamefully admit that I would be extremely qualified to help you out. Anyway, you start by sending an email through Craigslist to respond to the ad. I had a little back and forth emailing with a woman who was offering to do a glory hole in her apartment. Sent pictures, strats, etc., and eventually was given a cell phone number where we continued texting. Eventually, I was given an address and instructions. Walk in, step up to the curtain, unzip, finish my business, and then leave quietly, because my roommate was sleeping. So anyway, halfway through this blowjob, I realized that I'm no longer in someone's mouth, but I am currently fucking them from behind through the curtain. No protection. She was moaning and enjoying it, which really got me off, and I told her I was about to finish and she held me in. So I finished inside, and I was thinking, holy shit, what have I done? Texted her afterward. She was on birth control and was allegedly clean. Wanted to get myself tested immediately and everything was okay. Eventually got her to send a picture, and she sent one of a slightly chubby Mexican girl with half of some black dude's head in the frame. I bring up the races because eventually during a later meeting I saw one of her legs through the curtain and she was black. It made me wonder if perhaps she was the dude in the picture? Perhaps transgender? I would only confess this on this throwaway account. I was so sexually inexperienced that I literally couldn't tell an asshole to a pussy. It was always so dark and I was never really in control of where I was sticking my thing. If it were actually a dude, I might have been fucking the loosest guy in my town. Anyway, since that discovery, I have stopped going to him/her, even though his or her oral skills were amazing. In this current age of modernity, I'm not exactly ashamed of possibly being a technical homosexual. If anything, it seems like something that could make me more interesting to the right crowd. Story 6. Best experience, became regular buddies with the guy. He was a bike enthusiast, and we went biking several weekends. The worst experience. Went to the guy after talking and deciding whose penis would go in whose orifice. The guy had lied about his stats. I'm talking a real chubby beer buddy out to 10-month pregnancy level. Well, I'm here anyway, all revved up, secretly grit my teeth and say, let's do it. He wants it without a condom. He claims to be a virgin and needs his cherry popped. Seriously, dude, your number is on the freaking wall of a mall bathroom. You want me to believe that you're a virgin? He got offended by my